Hello, and welcome to Office Hours with Dr. Dan. I'm Dan. Today we're going to talk about grades. And the question is, do grades matter? And the short answer is, yes, grades matter, at least for most of us, and at least for a specific amount of time after you're finished with school. So they matter while you're in school, and then for some time after school, and then after that they become much, much less important as you move along through your career. So in the interest of full disclosure, for those of you that didn't look at the video, the introduction to this channel video, or listen to the podcast where I go over my biography a little bit, my grades were decent, but they weren't anything, oh my gosh, spectacular. So my undergrad cumulative GPA, what I graduated with, was a 3.17. When I was working on my master's, I finished up with a 3.48. And then my PhD was 3.59. So those are my cumulative GPAs. And you notice there was a pretty good jump between undergrad and master's, and then master's and PhD kind of stayed about the same. I always find it a little interesting looking back that my GPA for my undergraduate is the lowest of those three, considering that when I was an undergraduate, all I had to do was go to school. I didn't have an outside job during the school year. I worked over the summer, but not during the school year. So all I had to do was be a student, and yet that was the lowest grade. So, live and learn kind of thing. So like I said, yes, grades are important for most people. And there's always going to be somebody or somebodies out there who say, oh, I got this great job, and my grades sucked. I just barely graduated and blah blah blah, or I didn't even go to school and I got a great job, and congratulations to those people. Those are the exceptions rather than the rule, because again, remember, you're getting hired for your skills, but one of the indicators of how well you learned those skills are your grades. So bear that in mind. It's not to say that a high GPA trumps everything. It's the skills. What are the employers looking for? So like I say, your skills are what the employers are looking for. When they put out a job description, for civil engineers, they may be like, okay, we want somebody who is an expert in concrete design, or we want someone who's an expert in geotechnical engineering or traffic engineering, which are all subsets of civil engineering. So those skills are important. So if you have no idea how to do traffic analysis and do pavement design, and those are the skills that the job description requires, you may have a 4.0 GPA in civil engineering, but you're maybe more on the environmental track, and someone with a 3 or a 2 something GPA who knows how to do traffic analysis and pavement design will probably get that job as opposed to someone with a higher GPA, because it's the skills. Now, if there are several people applying for the job and they all have basically the same skill set, then GPA is a filter. So if you have someone with a 4.0 and then someone with a 2.0, that person with the 2.0 is going to have a much harder time getting the job if they're in competition with people who have the same skill sets. If the 2.0 person has a lot of experience in a specific area that the employer is looking for, then that 2.0 GPA becomes a lot less meaningful when you're talking about the skills. And just as kind of a for your information FYI thing, a job description that an employer posts, that is the ideal candidate. If the employer could find someone that had all of these skills and is willing to work for what we're going to pay him, then that's great. But not every person who applies for that job, or maybe none of the people who apply for the job, are going to have all of the skills. So if you have the majority of the skills that are listed in a job description, then go ahead and apply for that job, whether it's a full-time job or an internship or just a part-time job while you're working through school. Again, the job descriptions are, I say, for the ideal candidate, and not everybody is going to meet that, and it just depends on how many people apply. Maybe there's enough people that apply for that job that the employer finds, okay, hey, I found my perfect candidate who has everything that I want and more, or maybe they don't. So it doesn't really hurt you to apply. And if nothing else, if you get called in for an interview and you don't get the job, at least you're practicing your interviewing skills. As far as grades go, watch becoming over-involved in extracurricular activities. I mean, being a well-rounded student, someone who does more than just goes to class, study, is important, but if your involvement in extracurricular activities is hurting your grades, then you really need to take a step back and look at what's important. What's important, not what's more fun. I mean, being involved in extracurricular activities is probably way more fun than worrying about your grades, but the way I tried to look at it later on in life, particularly master's and PhD, is going to school is kind of your job. May not always enjoy it, but it's important and it's something you've got to put the time in. College is not easy. Like I talked about a little bit, GPA and your grades, that is something that is very easy for people to use as a filter. And that's whether it's a scholarship committee, a potential employer, a grad school application committee. GPA is a quick, down and dirty way of looking at someone's success in school, how well they've learned the material based on their grades, and it's a quick filter. So if someone has to go through 100 job applications, one of the quick things they can do is just like, okay, everyone over a 3.0 in this pile and everyone below a 3.0 in this pile and everyone below a 2.0 in the garbage can, something like that. So there's a quick sorting process. Whether or not that's fair, who knows, but if someone's got to get through 100 resumes, they're not going to look at every resume from top to bottom and read every single word. It's just they don't have the time. And if someone comes in with a 2.1 resume, then that's going to be really tempting to just plop over and put that in the do not worry about anymore pile. Just as one of the things to keep in mind about grades is the farther along you get in school, the harder it is to move your cumulative GPA up or down. And you have your cumulative GPA is made up of the grades of all the classes you've taken. So the farther along you get in your college career, the more difficult it is to skew that GPA. So getting a D in your freshman year is going to hurt your cum way more than getting a D in your junior or senior years. I mean, it's just whether you get your D in your freshman year or your junior or senior year, your final graduating cum GPA is going to basically be the same, but it's just going to hurt more earlier on in your college career because you have less of a buffer. So my term GPAs when I was an undergrad ranged from 2.25 to 3.91, but my cum only ranged from 2.85 to 3.17. And it's interesting to note that 3.91 was the first semester of my senior year when I was taking basically all civil engineering classes, all upper level civil engineering class. And I had some outside responsibilities with Air Force ROTC that took up a lot of time. So that was my best semester when I was basically the busiest I was ever in college, but I was taking classes that I liked. And not that those classes were necessarily easy, but they were classes that I liked, so I was more than willing to put the time in to get them done. So another thing that the GPA is used for that you may not think about right off the bat is getting and keeping scholarships while you're in college. So when you're in high school, it's junior, senior year, you may be applying for all these scholarships for college, and that's great. But there are scholarships available for people who are already in college. Particularly if you're going to be in your junior and senior year, there are these businesses and trade organizations who want to get more people into their specific field. So in civil engineering, maybe geotechnical companies want to get more geotechs. So they'll make scholarships available for people who are studying geotechnical engineering or structural engineering, things like that. So that's handy to know. For scholarships you managed to get while you were in high school that you're carrying with you in college, some of those scholarships may have minimum GPA requirements to keep. So that's really important for you to know. Whatever scholarships you get, what are the minimum GPA requirements to keep that scholarship? Because it's be a double kick in the butt to have a bad semester that lowers your cum below a certain level, and then boom, all of a sudden one of your major scholarships isn't available to you anymore. So you need to keep that in mind. So know what your requirements are when you get those scholarships. I mean, me personally, when I went to school, I had a $1,000 a year scholarship from the school. And that $1,000 a year for my freshman year went down to $500 my sophomore, junior, and senior year because my freshman year grades weren't high enough to keep it at $1,000. So, remember, that was back in the late 80s, early 90s, so $1,000 went a lot farther back then than it does now. And on the topic of scholarships that are only available once you've already started school, potentially particularly grad school. A buddy of mine, when I was working on my PhD, he was working on his master's, and we were both doing geotech type things. Well, he was just sitting around in his office at school one day, and one of the administrators within the civil engineering department tracked him down and announced that, hey, if you fill out this form, you'll get a $5,000 scholarship. Wasn't that you will be applying for a $5,000 scholarship. You will get it because a company donated money for a scholarship for specific people studying geotechnical engineering, and he was basically the only one that was eligible for that scholarship. So that scholarship found him, and all he had to do was agree that he would, when he was finished with his master's, he would interview with the company that provided the scholarship. Didn't have to take a job with him, he just had to interview with them, which is no big deal. So sometimes scholarships find you, but rarely is it that way around. So when you get into school, or if you're in school, check with your department to see what scholarships are available for college students, for people in your year, in your program. And again, grades, particularly for scholarship type things, are going to be a very important part of that application process. Internships. Again, GPA is a good filter for internships. Again, your skills, again, are going to be important. If it's a programming internship and you have no idea how to turn on a computer, then you're not going to get that internship. But the more popular the internship is, the more that GPA can be used to filter out the applicants. And some internships may have a minimum GPA to even apply. If you're applying, if you've got a 2.5 GPA and the minimum's 3, then they don't even want you to apply. So the GPA, while you're in school, your grades are very important. Learning what you're there to study is also very, very important. That's what's going to get you your jobs later on down the road, but grades are important. So it's one of those things. On my soapbox here for a minute, I've seen some of these videos of people out there waving their hands like, oh, grades are overrated, they're not important. It's like, well, again, later on in life, me, 46 years old, the grades that I got during school right now are in no way, shape, or form important. If I'm out interviewing for a job, no one's going to ask me what my grades were in undergraduate. In fact, I've never had a job interview where anyone asked me my grades. It's, what skills do you have? What have you done? My first job out of school was working for the Indiana Department of Transportation. I had an internship with them the summer before. So I was a known quantity. It's like, okay, well, you graduated, boom, you're good to go. After I got out of the Air Force, no one's ever asked for my grades. Graduate school, so if you're thinking about graduate school, again, you're going on furthering your education, they're going to have minimum GPA requirements. And the thing with grad school is going to grad school right after undergrad, the requirements, there's a lot less wiggle room on waivers and things like that. When I went to get through my master's program, it was after being out of undergrad for something like 5 years. So that 3.17 was not really that big a deal then. One, because I wasn't asking anyone for any money to go through for my master's. I was paying my own way. And then as a practicing engineer in the particular program I was in, they're like, okay, well, yeah, you're above the minimum, so there's no need for a waiver, but it's kind of one of those things that if I was applying for graduate school right out of undergrad with a 3.17, things might have been a lot more difficult than it's like, oh, you're a practicing engineer, you've got your license, welcome aboard kind of thing. Part of the grad school process is going to be taking whatever GMAT, GRE kind of thing that they have. And if you get a really good score on that graduate school admission test, that's great. But if they look at your graduate school admission test scores that are just awesome, and then your GPA was kind of low, they're like, well, is this person really not applying themselves in school? And in grad school, particularly if you're going to be a research assistant or a teaching assistant, they want to know that you're going to apply yourself. Now, if you have a really high GPA and you kind of bomb your graduate admissions test, GMAT, GRE, what have you, that can throw up some flags too, but then you can always potentially go back and retake those tests. Remember, grad school, there's a lot less hand-holding going on. They treat you a lot more like an adult in grad school, so it's all up to you. If you're having trouble in a class, then you need to work to learn that material. Your professors in grad school, the subjects are going to be a lot more difficult, ideally. I mean, if the subjects in grad school are not difficult, what's that grad school program's quality? But the grad school classes, you're expected to do a lot more work on your own, a lot more self-learning. So a low GPA is kind of like, well, does that person have the motivation to go and learn by themselves if that's what they need to? If you want to try to be a teaching assistant or a research assistant in grad school, having a high GPA is going to be important, because a TA or RA, generally you're going to get some kind of stipend. They may give you a tuition waiver, where that means tuition is paid for, then you get some kind of stipend. You're basically an employee of the university, whether they do a full tuition waiver or some kind of stipend. So those are very competitive programs. So the higher your GPA, the more competitive you're going to be, the more likely you're going to get to do that. So if you can find someone who's basically going to pay you to get your master's or PhD, so you come out with no additional debt, that's a win-win situation. And you also get to determine, well, do I want to be a college professor? Because if you're a teaching assistant, that gives you a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be a professor. So maybe that's something you want to do, maybe it's something you don't want to do. All right. Your first job after graduation. So you get your degree, and now whether this is you're going to get a job with your undergraduate degree, or you're going to get a job right after you finish your master's degree, that's when your GPA, as far as a job, a full-time job, is going to be the most important. I'm not saying it's the most important thing that the employer is going to look at, but it's going to be the time when your GPA is the most important. When you're going and looking for another job 10 years after you graduate, your GPA will probably not even come up. So again, some employers will have a minimum GPA to even allow you to interview with them. Just again, it's how popular is that company, how many jobs are available, how good is the economy when you graduate? I mean, that's something that you have no control over that. And how good the economy is when you start school versus when you finish school, who knows what that's going to be. So the better the economy is, the more jobs there are out there, the less your GPA is going to be an issue, because if employers are having trouble filling positions, then their minimums for who they will take for their jobs go down. It's like, well, we need bodies to fill these positions, and we know we're going to have to do some training, because we're not finding the candidates with all the skills we want, so maybe they'll have to have some in-house training or send you someplace to get familiar with whatever skills they need for that job. So again, GPA is the filter. Someone comes in and they get a stack of resumes on their desk or in their electronic in basket, and they've got to start going through. So again, whether that's fair or not, that's a very quick way to go through and say yes, yes, yes for further consideration, or no, no, no. Also, spelling, grammar, and not following the rules. If they say, here's how we want your resume formatted, or here's everything we want you to include when we apply, if you don't follow their directions, that's just asking them to throw things off to the side. It's like, because can you follow directions? It may be annoying, and they may be doing that intentionally. They may make things difficult for the application process to just weed out the people who aren't really serious, to save them some time and energy in reviewing everything. So as far as GPA, one of the things is the known quality of the program you are graduating from can help make up for a somewhat lower GPA. So if you're graduating from one of the top engineering, computer science, art history programs in the country, as opposed to a program that's not respected or not accredited, then if you've graduated from one of the better programs, if not quote unquote the best program, then it's kind of expected that your GPA is going to be a little lower because you're in with a bunch of really smart, motivated people. So the quality of your degree program can help kind of offset your GPA. Now again, graduating from a top program with a 2.0 GPA is still going to be rough to get a job. So you need to be vigilant on where you are going. Now I realize if you're already in school, this is kind of a moot point, but if you're looking to apply for schools, whether it's undergrad or grad school, how well known is that program? I mean, granted, everyone has to start off at some point, but do you want to be the guinea pigs while people are starting up their programs? And be real leery of any kind of for-profit kind of school. I mean, it's 2016 as this video's getting filmed, and there's a lot of things in the news about specific schools that are for-profit schools, and they're just over-promised and under-delivered on what they were selling the students on, what kind of jobs they could get in their starting salary. So if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So you need to look at, what do you want to do when you graduate? If you want to go be a programmer for Company X, well, call human resources at Company X or find somebody who works at Company X and ask them, do you hire people who graduate from this school with this degree? And if they kind of go, oh yeah, that's we hire those people all the time, or if they kind of go, what school? Bear that in mind. I mean, it's your education. You need to take responsibility for the choices that you make. It's like, oh, well, the school said they were great and the school said we could get these jobs. Well, just because the school says that doesn't mean that it's true. Again, particularly for the for-profit schools. Not that your non-profit schools, your state schools and whatnot don't have issues of their own. They do, but there's a lot more regulation with a state school because they answer to a board of trustees who answers to the state legislature, as opposed to a for-profit school that's a company that they answer to their shareholders. If you're having trouble with your grades, if you're in school, you've got low grades, the issue that comes up is, are you in the right degree program? Are you doing what you want to do, what you're good at? That's not to say go chase your passions. All right, I hear that a lot. It's like, oh, you need to do what you're passionate about. If you can do what you're passionate about, and that's going to pay the bills, that's going to allow you, I'm not saying be Bill Gates rich, but allow you to not have to live with your parents unless you're being a good child and taking care of your parents in their old age. But if you're living with your parents because you have no other choice, then that's something you need to be careful of. When you're looking at, well, what do I want to do? Why am I going to school? My personal belief is you don't go to school to be more well-rounded. You go to school to get the skills you need to find a job. Now, part of that is taking your liberal arts and humanities type of classes so that you can speak and communicate effectively, because that's important. One of my hobbies is writing, so I've got a couple of fiction books out there, and my editor's beating me over the head sometimes on the rules of grammar and punctuation that I've forgotten. So I'm not saying that your liberal arts aren't important. They are. But again, remember, what are you going to do with your degree when you get out? Are you in the right degree program? I started off as an electrical engineer, and as I've said in the introductory video, I went into electrical engineering because the Air Force was giving the majority of their scholarships in electrical engineering. It's like, okay, well, that increases the odds of getting the scholarship. Then I get into electrical engineering, really into electrical engineering, first part of sophomore year, and it's like, oh my God, we're playing with oscilloscopes. We have to do all this programming to make whatever we build function. It's like, no way do I want to do that the rest of my life. So fortunately, I was allowed to switch to civil engineering, and I did all right. That's not to say that switching to something that you like is going to be easy. College is hard. You're learning new things. So if you're not learning new things while you're there, and very few people can start doing something and pick it up right away. If you are playing a musical instrument, did you pick that instrument up and were an expert right away? Probably not. You had to practice, and you probably didn't like to practice all the time. Going to school is rough, whether it's college, as far as official university, or whether you're in a trade school learning to repair a transmission. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take some work. There aren't all these hacks and tricks and all that. Sometimes it's just hard work and repetitiveness and learning what you need to learn. So, and are you at the right school? So if you've busted your hump to get into this quote-unquote elite school and you just barely got in by the skin of your teeth, so you're going to be surrounded by all these super duper people who got into all this elite school. So now you're not the big fish in the little pond, you're the little fish in the big pond. You've got all of these super smart, super motivated people, and it's like, oh great, now I'm not going to just automatically be the top person in the class. I'm going to be down towards the bottom. So if you can get into an elite school and someone else is paying for it, then you're not going to come out with a massive load of debt, and you're going to be able to get through. That's great. But just keep that in mind, is just barely getting into your first choice school or the elite school always going to be the best thing? Because you come out with a civil engineering degree from an elite school, and you come out with a civil engineering degree from a well-regarded public school, state school, then the difference in salary not going to be that much. I mean, if it's all about civil engineers start off somewhere around here, electrical engineers start up somewhere around here, chemical engineers unfortunately start somewhere up around here, bless their hearts. So, just look at that as it's like, oh my gosh, this school is crazy, as opposed to one that still has a good program. I'm not saying you go to a school that has an easy program as known as a diploma mill. That's not going to do you any good. But elite schools that everybody graduated in the top 3, 4, 5% of their class and had 8 million extracurricular activities and just all these overachievers, like, good for them. But is that really the best fit for you? Because a lot of times these elite schools can be pretty expensive, so you got to be careful about getting buried in debt. And I realize we've kind of strayed off the path for grades, but the grades come in. It's like you've gone to this school and you're getting saddled with this debt. Maybe that school's not the right fit for you. And when do grades stop mattering? So we've talked about all this time that grades matter while you're in school because there's all the scholarships and then internships and getting a job. When do grades stop mattering? And grades stop mattering when you have a few years of relevant experience in your field. So for the civil engineering side of the house, generally 4 years after we graduate, as long as we've been doing engineering, that's the time that we're allowed to become licensed engineers. We have PE after our name, professional engineer. That's a state license. There's some tests we have to take, And once a civil engineer gets that P after their name, grades really stop mattering, because it's like, okay, you've taken and passed the engineering license exam. When a CPA, certified public accountant, gets their license, then grades are really not going to matter, because you've passed your professional licensing test. That shows that you have some degree of mastery of your field. If your field doesn't have a licensing type of requirement, then it's when do you have the relevant experience. If you're doing computer programming and project management, and you have several projects under your belt that were successful, then that's when grades stop mattering. So several years after you graduate, if you're going to look for a new job, grades probably aren't going to come up. And if it's several years after you graduate and you had a lowish kind of GPA, then when you're in the interview, you just address that. It's like, yeah, I look back and it's like, I could have done a whole lot better. I'm glad that I learned my lesson and I do my work now, because the people you're sitting across from, some of them, when you're interviewing, probably had not the best grades in college or realized they could have done better. So own up to it, and like I say, it's not that big a deal. Grades may stop mattering once you're several years out of school, but there's this lifelong learning thing. And again, we're a little bit off the grade topic, but this lifelong learning, whatever field you go in, things are going to evolve. If you're a computer programmer, new languages are going to come out, new machines are going to come out. You need to keep up with what is relevant so you're still valuable to your company. If you don't learn anything new from the time you start with your company out into the future, then that means every year all these new people coming in are going to be more valuable than you, because they're learning new skills. So if at some point the programming language you use, or the piece of software, if you're a structural engineer, and all you know is that, and then that piece of software no longer is valid, or the computer language is no longer used, then boom, you're out of luck. Your skills aren't in demand. So even once you're finished with your quote-unquote formal education, formal education, something that you're going to come out with a degree from, you still are going to need to learn as you go on. Keep up with the new things in your field, the new technologies, the new ways of doing things, so that you're still relevant. Because again, my philosophy for college, you go to college to learn skills that will make it easier for you to get a job, so you can be self-sufficient and have time to do whatever else other than work that you find important. If that's going out and doing charity work, if that's writing books, whatever that is, so that you have the free time to do that, and you're not just, oh my God, worried about how you're going to pay the next light bill. So hopefully these answered some questions about whether or not grades are important. And again, yes, they are for a finite amount of time, and after that, they don't matter. So take care and see you next time.